The attic was a ghost of neglected memories, filled with dust-laden boxes and forgotten treasures from a life Sarah once believed was picture-perfect. Her hands were shaky, almost as if they could sense the weight of truth lying dormant within the diary she had just discovered. Each step she took in that dim space was a step toward a whirlwind of revelations. She couldn't have anticipated the storm her late mother had left behind in this old, tattered book. Sarah barely remembered her mother. She had passed when Sarah was just a child. Her father, John, had always been a pillar of strength and kindness in her life. His laughter would echo through the house, a beacon of warmth in their small town nestled in the heart of America. But today, in this moment, those echoes felt hollow, filled with deceit she hadn't yet fully grasped. "I should have known," Sarah whispered to herself, flipping a page that seemed to groan under the weight of its years. "How could I have been so blind?" The diary entries began innocuously enough, a young woman's musings of love, dreams, and hopes. But as the pages turned brittle in her fingers, Sarah's breath caught when she reached the entry that shifted the narrative. May 12, 1983, John appears so different today. His secrets wear heavily on his shoulders. He has begun whispering in his sleep, names I do not know, stories I cannot fathom. Sarah remembered the year well. She had just turned 5, and she recalled the soft glow of fairy lights at her birthday party, her father lifting her on his shoulders, the world enormous and beautiful from up there. The memory crystallized like sugar in her mind, now bitter with the knowledge that her father had been hiding something monumental. She turned page after page, the sunlight from the small attic window cutting through the gloom and illuminating her reading. Her mother's neat handwriting danced with emotion, each stroke of ink a step deeper into treachery. August 17, 1985, John spoke of a life he once had, before me, before us. A child he left behind, a promise never kept. My heart aches for the woman I am becoming, trapped in his web of lies. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. She felt like a trespasser in her own family history, each revelation prying open wounds she hadn't known existed. Her father's image as a devoted single parent crumbled with every revelation. Over the next few hours, she pieced together a life shrouded in secrets and deception. Her father, a man who had sculpted his existence into something resembling a Norman Rockwell painting, had hidden a past that could tarnish their legacy forever. The afternoon sun waned, leaving long shadows that stretched across the attic, much like the shadows now cast over her own life. She was engulfed in questions without answers and a loyalty torn by truth. How do you reconcile the love for a parent with the knowledge of their betrayal? Eventually, Sarah found herself sitting on the attic floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her childhood innocence. The air was heavy with dust and the scent of old paper, a testament to words kept secret for far too long. As she descended the staircase back to her main living space, every photograph she passed seemed to leer at her with mocking familiarity. Pictures of her father with a smile so genuine, juxtaposed with the heavy truth she now carried in her heart. Sarah knew one thing: she couldn't keep this to herself. The towering figure of her father, so beloved and revered, needed to answer for these ghosts. But as much as she wanted justice for her mother and for herself, a part of her feared the confrontation. Would her father even acknowledge these truths, or would he weave another narrative to protect the life he had built? The thought of facing him, confronting the man who had been her hero, felt insurmountable. Yet, she knew she must. The truth demanded it, and her mother's silent plea from the past echoed in her soul. "Seek the truth, my love. Make of it what you will, find the peace I could not." Her decision was made. She would find peace, even if it meant tearing apart everything she had ever known. Sarah spent the next few days in a haze. Every chore, every mundane task seemed overshadowed by the looming confrontation. Her father's laughter, a comforting soundtrack from her childhood, now felt like an orchestrated symphony of deceit. She sat at her kitchen table late into the night, her mother's diary open before her, trying to understand the complexities of the human heart. How could someone she loved have been both a caring parent and a purveyor of such profound betrayal? The revelation had shaken her to the core, yet in her heart, Sarah yearned for answers, clarity, and perhaps a fragment of redemption for her father. She needed to understand the reasoning behind his choices, the motivations that led to a life built on secrets. Finally, one rainy afternoon, summoning all her courage, Sarah called her father. The rain tapping against the window seemed to mimic the pounding anxiety within her chest. When he answered, his voice was warm and familiar, tinged with surprise and joy. "Sarah, darling. How are you?" John's voice crackled over the phone, filled with genuine affection. "Hi, Dad," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can we talk? I mean, really talk." "Of course, sweetheart," he responded without hesitation. "What's on your mind?" I've found something of Mom's," she started, the words precarious on her tongue. "I'd really like to discuss it with you. Can you come over this weekend?" There was a pause, a momentary silence that stretched like a taut wire between them. "Sure," John finally said, his voice now carrying an undertone of concern. "I'll be there. We can talk about anything you need." Saturday arrived, and with it, her father. The house felt small and enclosing as he walked through the door, shaking off the rain. His presence was both comforting and unnerving, like revisiting a childhood haunt that had changed in your absence. They sat in the living room, the diary hidden under a stack of magazines on the coffee table. Sarah watched her father as he settled in. His hair was grayer than she remembered, his face more lined, but his eyes, those benevolent eyes that had guided her through life, were unchanged. Could those eyes, she wondered, belong to a man capable of such deception? As they exchanged pleasantries, Sarah felt the tension coil inside her like a spring. Finally, unable to prolong it any further, she reached for the diary, placing it between them. Her heart pounded in the silence that followed. "Dad," she began, "I need you to be honest with me. I found this in the attic." She touched the diary gently, as though it were a fragile thing. "It's Mom's." John's gaze fell to the book, his expression unreadable. He remained silent, an air of resignation settling over him. "She wrote about things," Sarah continued, her voice firmer now. "About you. About a past I never knew existed." Her father's eyes closed for a moment, a deep breath filling the space between them. "Sarah," he said softly, "there are things I never wanted you to know." "But why, Dad?" She interrupted, her voice cracking. "Why hide such important parts of your life?" "It's complicated," he replied, his voice weary yet calm. "Things were different back then. I didn't want those mistakes, those choices, to mar the life we built together. I believed if I kept them hidden, we could have some semblance of normalcy, of happiness." Sarah's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "But it wasn't real, was it? It was all based on a lie." John leaned forward, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. "Not all of it," he insisted, his voice pleading. "My love for you was never a lie, Sarah. You were the best part of my life." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of regret and sincerity. "Yes, I made mistakes, terrible ones. Leaving a child behind, promising forever to two families, it was wrong. I know that. Why didn't you ever tell me?" Sarah's voice was small, almost childlike in its need for understanding. "I was ashamed," John admitted, his voice breaking. "Ashamed of what I did. I convinced myself you didn't need to carry the burden of my sins. But I see now that hiding it was just another betrayal." Silence settled over them again, punctuated only by the distant sound of the rain. Sarah looked at her father, searching for the man she knew amid the stranger he had become. "What about that child?" she eventually asked. "Do they know?" John shook his head, an expression of deep sorrow crossing his features. "No, Sarah. No one knows. I thought by living one honest life, I could somehow make up for the deceit. But it seems I only created more pain." Sarah's heart ached with the weight of his words. There was a raw honesty in his admission, a vulnerability that pulled at her conflicting emotions. She watched him, this man who had been her hero, now laid bare by the truths he could no longer shield her from. Part of her wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but another part, the part wounded by his deception, held her back. "Dad," she sighed, the weight of accusation dulling her voice, "I don't know what to do with all of this." John nodded, his gaze falling to the diary once more, a book of their shared past now a testament to fractured realities. "I understand, sweetheart. I'm sorry for everything." They sat together, the rain continuing its steady drumming outside, a soundtrack to their quiet reckoning. As the minutes stretched into hours, Sarah knew their journey wasn't over. Confrontation was merely the beginning, the first step in a long path of healing and acceptance. Her father had finally acknowledged his past, yet the future remained uncertain. The diary might have opened wounds, but it also offered a chance for truth and perhaps, in time, reconciliation. But in that moment, the promise of forgiveness felt distant. The rain continued to wash over the world outside, and inside, the storm of secrets slowly settled, leaving room for reflection, for hope, and for the possibility of new beginnings in the spaces carved by understanding. As the rain drummed gently against the windowpanes, Sarah and John sat together, bound by the silence of what remained unsaid. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of unspoken words and emotions too heavy for speech. Sarah felt the weight of the diary on the table, its presence a tangible reminder of the past she couldn't change, yet couldn't ignore. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions. Her father, once a beacon of certainty, now represented the complexities of human frailty, a man caught between right and wrong, love and fear. She grappled with the stories her mother had penned, stories of dreams truncated and promises shattered. Each word was a window into a past she had been blind to, yet could now not forget. Despite the betrayal, a part of Sarah longed for the comfort of her father's embrace, the safe haven he had once provided. But the chasm of secrets between them loomed large, and she wasn't sure how or if it could be crossed. She turned to the diary again, finding solace not in the revelations but in the connection it offered to her mother, whose voice echoed from beyond the grave, guiding her through this labyrinth of emotion. On a particularly dreary afternoon, Sarah decided to visit the places her mother had written about. She needed to understand the world as her mother had seen it, to piece together the life of the woman who had loved deeply and suffered silently. The old park, barely touched by time, stood still and serene. She could almost see her mother's younger self sitting on the bench, contemplating the life choices that lay ahead. Sarah imagined the gentle rustling of leaves whispering secrets of the past, sharing stories only they were privy to. As she walked along the path, the air crisp and invigorating, Sarah felt a strange kind of peace envelop her. Despite the heartache, she could feel her mother's presence, urging her to seek truth, to find her own way through the tangled vines of their family history. Her next stop was the church her mother had frequented. It was a small structure, with stained glass windows casting colorful dapples across the wooden pews. Sarah sat quietly in one of the back rows, the weight of the place cocooning her in its timeless embrace. Here, she allowed herself to feel the full force of her emotions, to forgive, to grieve, and perhaps, to hope again. The diary was tucked safely in her bag, a constant companion on this journey. As she traced the etchings on the confessionals, she wondered if her mother had ever found solace here, if the burdens she carried had been lightened by the act of faith and the promise of redemption. With a new resolve, Sarah knew she had to meet the child her father had left behind. It was a daunting prospect, filled with uncertainties and potential heartache. Yet, it seemed necessary, an essential step in untangling the threads of lives intertwined through fate and choice. She broached the subject with her father over the phone. "Dad, I think I need to find this person. I need to meet them." John's hesitation was palpable. "Are you sure, Sarah? It might bring more pain than you anticipate." "Maybe," she acknowledged. "But it might also bring healing. Don't we owe them, and ourselves, that chance?" There was a long pause before John spoke again, his voice laden with a mix of fear and hope. "I'll help you however I can." The search wasn't easy, but with persistence and a few leads from the scant mentions in the diary, Sarah finally traced the person down to a small, vibrant town a few hours away. The anticipation of the meeting filled her with both dread and exhilaration. On the drive there, the landscape unfurled like a tapestry, each passing mile weaving its way into the narrative of her life. Questions swirled in her mind. Would this person hate her? Or see her as a bridge to a family they never knew? How would they react to meeting a sibling they'd been unaware of? Arriving at the town, she felt a cocktail of emotions churn within her. This was the moment her life might shift once more, when past and present would collide in a nexus of possibilities. She found herself standing in front of a modest house, its facade brimming with warmth and character. Taking a deep breath, she rang the bell, her heart a furious drumbeat in her chest. A woman answered, her features hauntingly familiar. There was no mistaking the eyes, her father's eyes. Time seemed to stop as they regarded each other, an understanding passing between them that transcended words. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she introduced tentatively, her voice catching slightly. "I believe we might be related." The woman stood silent for a moment, her gaze searching Sarah's face for truths yet unspoken. "I'm Emily," she finally said, her voice warm and cautious. "I think you might be right." Invited inside, they sat across from each other, two strangers bound by a past neither had chosen yet were both irrevocably affected by. Between them lay a table, unobtrusive yet symbolic, a neutral ground for the unfolding of revelations. "I just found out," Sarah began, unsure of how to encapsulate the tumultuous events of the past weeks into words. "About you, about our connection." Emily nodded, her eyes softening, perhaps seeing the struggle mirrored in Sarah's expression. "I only learned about him a few years ago," she confessed. "My adoptive parents found some papers after they passed. It took me a while to piece it all together." Despite the awkwardness, there was also an undeniable sense of relief, the relief of finally sharing the weight of secrecy with someone who understood its gravity. They delved into stories of their lives, the years missed and the melancholy of what could have been. Yet within that sorrow, there was also the potential of new beginnings, of forging a bond anchored not in the past but in a shared journey forward. By the end of the evening, as they stood by the door, Emily said something that lingered in Sarah's mind long after she had left. "We can't change where we come from, but we can choose where we go from here." As Sarah drove back, stars began to prick the night sky, tiny beacons of light in a vast, uncertain universe. And in those moments of solitude, she felt a flicker of hope, a fragile yet fiercely enduring flame that perhaps, amidst the ruins of secrets and lost time, something beautiful and lasting could be built. She had taken the first step, and while the path ahead was still uncertain, it felt less daunting with a newfound ally by her side. In the days following her visit with Emily, Sarah found herself engulfed in a whirlwind of emotions. The weight of her family's secrets no longer felt like a solitary burden. Instead, it had transformed into a shared journey, one that she was now navigating with both her father and her newfound sister. The trajectory of Sarah's life, once so certain and grounded, had shifted dramatically. Yet it was within this upheaval that she began to find a new sense of purpose. She realized that the past, as painful and convoluted as it was, didn't have to dictate a future devoid of hope and reconciliation. With renewed determination, Sarah returned to the task of rebuilding her relationship with her father. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that the trust which had been fractured would take time and effort to mend. Yet she was willing, driven by love and a profound desire for understanding. One evening, as the twilight melted into a canopy of stars, Sarah invited John over for dinner. It was a simple meal, but it represented a significant step forward, a gesture of reconciliation. As they ate, the conversation was punctuated with tentative laughter and long, contemplative silences. There was a new fragility in their relationship, a vulnerability that was both terrifying and deeply authentic. It was this authenticity, Sarah realized, that was the cornerstone of the healing process. "Dad," she began cautiously, after a lull in the conversation. "I think I'm starting to understand why you did what you did. Not that it was right, but I see how fear and regret can drive a person. John looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and remorse. Every day, I wish I could go back and make different choices. But having the chance to face those choices with you now, it means more than I can say. They talked late into the night, the room echoing with stories that spanned decades, weaving the tapestry of a life and love interspersed with shadows and light. While the pain of the past lingered, it no longer felt insurmountable. They were stitching together a new narrative, one marked not by the absence of wrongdoing, but by an abundance of love and redemption. Meanwhile, Sarah's relationship with Emily blossomed. The initial awkwardness gave way to a genuine companionship. They spent weekends exploring old haunts, the familiar landscapes of Sarah's childhood now imbued with a sense of shared discovery. Emily, too, found herself drawing closer to John. Despite the years and the circumstances that had kept them apart, there was a palpable connection, a familial bond that transcended the complexities of their shared history. John was tentative but hopeful, eager to make amends and embrace the daughter he'd known only as a shadow in his past. Together, they navigated the delicate path of piecing together a family from the fragments of what once was, learning to forgive mistakes and find solace in the shared future that lay ahead. On a crisp autumn day that seemed to carry with it the promise of renewal, Sarah decided to gather them all at her house for a family meeting, a symbolic gesture to cement the new chapter they were all writing together. The day arrived with a golden sheen, the kind of day that spoke of healing and hope. Leaves crunched underfoot as Emily arrived, followed by John, his expression a blend of nervousness and anticipation. Inside, a fire crackled warmly in the hearth, casting a welcoming glow over the room. Sarah had prepared a feast, a labor of love that spoke to her commitment and her desire to nurture this nascent bond. As they gathered around the table, Sarah took a moment to look at each face: her father, who had shown courage in confronting his past, her sister, who had embraced the possibility of family despite the odds, and herself, stronger and more resilient for her journey through heartache and revelation. "Thank you all for being here," Sarah began, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "This isn't just a meal. It's a celebration of us, finding each other, and finding a way forward together." Tears glistened in her eyes as she continued. "It hasn't been easy. But I believe that by facing the truth, no matter how painful, we've opened the door to forgiveness and love." John reached across the table, his hand finding Sarah's. "You've shown me what courage really is," he said, his voice choked with gratitude. "And I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Emily smiled, her heart full. "I'm just glad we found each other. I never imagined this would be possible, but now that it is, I can't picture my life without either of you." They exchanged stories, laughter, and tears, the evening stretching before them with the warmth and comfort of newfound kinship. The shadows of the past, once looming and unforgiving, began to recede, replaced by the light of understanding and unconditional love. As the night deepened, Sarah stood to fetch an item she had carefully set aside. It was the diary, the catalyst for the journey that had brought them all here. She placed it on the table, a silent acknowledgement of her mother's enduring presence, her spirit interwoven in the reconciliations unfolding. "I think Mom would be proud," Sarah said softly, her fingers brushing the worn cover of the diary. "Proud of all of us, for finding the courage to confront the past and the grace to embrace the future." As they raised their glasses in a toast, the room was filled with the warmth of family, imperfect yet beautifully real. In that moment, Sarah understood the true nature of redemption and love. It was not the absence of flaws, but the willingness to face them with open hearts and the determination to build something meaningful from the pieces. With her family by her side, Sarah felt whole and at peace, ready to step into the future they were crafting together. The past had shaped them, but it no longer defined them. They were bound by something stronger, a shared resolve to create a legacy of love, forged in the fires of truth and the balm of forgiveness. In that unity, Sarah had finally found her home.